So, of course, you know where we are. I'm going to talk to you about the history of Chicago House and our operations now, which is most important to you all. Now, you know, the University of Chicago Oriental Institute set up Chicago House here because there are so many monuments from the Empire period of pharaonic history here, more than any other place in Egypt. And you all know that there have been many groups documenting the ancient monuments for publication since the time of Napoleon and the Description, when Napoleon brought scientists and architects and artists to draw and record all the beautiful monuments that they saw. And you know, since Napoleon was here, many of the monuments that they published in the Description are gone, completely gone. The only record is in the books that they made, the drawings that they made. So Chicago House was founded in 1924 to continue this work in Luxor because there's so many temples, so many tombs, they're so big, no one has documented them completely. So you know that our present facility is on the east bank, on the Corniche. Of course, this photograph is what it looked like min zaman in 1933, before the Corniche was built here. And now you've all seen the new Corniche that has been built in front of our house. It's very beautiful. And many of you have used our library right here, where we host many Egyptian students working on advanced degrees, so Egyptologists, archaeologists, and tour guides who are working on their masters and their PhDs. Now, our main activities in Luxor are documentation, and that's epigraphy, epigraphic work, which means copying texts. That's what we were founded to do, and that's still the biggest work that we do in Luxor, is making very careful drawings and photographs for our photographic archives and for our publications. Many of you have seen our publications, huge books. And we translate everything, all the hieroglyphic inscriptions that we copy, we also make translations. So this is the service that we provide Egypt and science, precise copies of all the texts, all the decoration, all the architecture in the temples and some tombs, and translations of all that material as well. But as you all know, in the last 20 years, everything's changed in Egypt and in Luxor. I'm not talking politics now. I'm not talking the last year. I'm talking the last 20 years. It used to be very dry in Luxor, and now it's not so dry anymore. In the winter, it gets very wet. It used to be there were very few people living in Luxor, and now there are many, many. And so agriculture has expanded. It used to be the crops were grown once a year here for a few months, and then there was the harvest, and that was all. Irrigation for 3 months when the Nile flooded, for instance, and then everything dried out. The groundwater went down, and everything was dry and safe. But now the irrigation canals are always filled. Egypt has to grow crops all year round to support the big population. And the monuments are always wet. Their foundations are in groundwater. The groundwater comes up into the stone, and there's a lot of salt trapped in the stone. There's salt in the groundwater from the limestone underneath the Nile Valley, and the salt eats away at the stone and turns into sand. And this process has speeded up during the last 20 years. It goes very quickly now. It used to be that salt would decay stone over hundreds of years, thousands of years. Now, in 6 months, salt decay stone very, very quickly. So, like all the archaeological expeditions in Egypt, we added conservation to our program about 20 years ago to help Egypt cope with the growing challenge of physically maintaining the monument. So we now do documentation, but we also try to make the monument strong. We work with the local Tarmim officials, and we have our own conservators who work at Luxor Temple and at Medina Habu. We also do restoration now, the third category, because we have many, many pieces of broken walls, Luxor Temple, Medina Habu, now TT 107 where we're working. So we put them back. Now I have a team of trained Egyptians who work with us who put the stone back on the wall. And our conservation team at Medina Habu, who you will see, is led by a very famous Egyptian conservator, Lutfi Hassan, who has done wonderful work all over Egypt. We are very, very lucky that he works with Chicago House during most of the winter. And I should also explain that we are here at Chicago House every year for 6 months. We're here from October 15th and we finish April 15th. So we have essentially 11 more days and we go back to the United States. Everyone takes work back with them. So the conservators write reports, the Egyptologists do translations back home of the hieroglyphic text we copied during the year, and the artists will take pencil drawings and they'll make them with ink lines, either computer generated or with India ink during the summer. So we work all year round, but we're only in Luxor for half the year. I come back every summer for meetings and to see our friends in Luxor and meet with the Ministry of Antiquities. So I come back every July, so some of you will see me. So don't be surprised if you see me in Luxor Temple looking at me. We are presently working on 4 sites. We have been working at Medina Habu on the right since 1924 when we were founded. We started with the mortuary temple of Ramses III, and now we're back doing all the other structures in the precinct. We're also working in a tomb again. This tomb, I'll talk more about it later, but it's contemporary with Kerouac. The tomb of Kerouac we published a long time ago, from the time of Amenhotep III. This tomb, Nefersekru, is also from the time of Amenhotep III. We're also working in Luxor Temple, primarily in the block yard, but also working in Kansu Temple with the American Research Center, again with fragmentary material. And I'll talk about all of these. Starting with Medina Habu. As I said, we began with the mortuary temple of Ramses III, and like all archaeological and foreign expeditions in Egypt, we applied for permission from the Egyptian government for permission to record, do documentation, drawings, and photography of the monuments of Ramses III in Luxor. And you know, there are many of them. Medina Habu, Karnak has a couple, Kansu Temple is a Ramses III temple, even Mu Temple has the remains of a Ramses III temple. So we started with the mortuary temple, and most of you know we have 8 huge books devoted to all the reliefs and inscriptions in the mortuary temple. We came back in the early 90s to record a second temple in the Medina Habu complex. Now you all know that the temple of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III here, this is also an Amen temple. But this temple existed before any of this was built. So when Ramses III first built his mortuary temple, the front of the mortuary temple was here, and Hatshepsut's temple was outside. When Ramses III celebrated his first jubilee, and only jubilee, because shortly afterward he got he enclosed the entire area in a new enclosure wall, and he built the high gate. That's a second phase for Medinat Habu. And after that construction, Hatshepsut's temple was inside his temple complex, not outside. So it's like Karnak, where the Ramses III temple outside the second pylon, originally that was outside of Karnak. It was outside the front of Karnak. But then when the first pylon was started, when the first court was constructed, Ramses III's temple was enclosed within the first court and then was inside Karnak. It's the same here with Hatshepsut's temple. When the Amun cult was founded in Luxor, at the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, you know, Amun, it was a fusion of Amun and Ra, because the family from Luxor reunited Egypt at the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. And so their god, their family god was Amun. And of course the king of the gods is Ra. And so they fused the two gods together, and they created a completely new cult center in Luxor based on the Atum Ra cult at Heliopolis. And so this temple was founded then because they're foundations of a Middle Kingdom temple underneath Hatshepsut's temple. Luxor temple was founded then, Karnak was founded then, and the mortuary temples on the West Bank were founded then as well, starting with Mentuhotep. They were all one unit. All of Luxor on the East Bank and the West Bank is one temple to the god Amun-Ra, split into these four parts. So it's very, very beautiful, very interesting. And Hatshepsut rebuilt this one. So she made it bigger. Originally it was less than half this size. And then, and this was dedicated to Amun in a very interesting form. He has not been born yet. He's like the cosmic egg in the back sanctuary. He hasn't hatched. At Luxor Temple, that's where Amun was born, and all the world with him. But here at Medinat Habu, he sleeps. He waits to be born. It's wonderful. So in the back sanctuary, there are no windows. There are no light wells. The sanctuary in the back of the small Amun temple is dark because Amun has not been born as the sun yet. So at Luxor temple he is born. This is where creation is celebrated. Karnak is essentially where Amun lived during most of the year, but because the Egyptians saw time as a circle, Amun had to come back to Luxor once every year during the Opet festival to be born again. So it's like during the course of the year, Amun gets older and older and older. It's like the myth of Ra. Remember, Ra gets very, very, very old. Well, Amun-Ra gets very old, and he has to come back to Luxor temple to be reborn. The king brings him and Amun of Luxor together, and they're all reborn together. So this is what the Festival of Opet's all about. And then Amun goes back to Karnak like a baby, and then he travels to all the mortuary temples during the beautiful Feast of the Valley. And, you know, the mortuary temples are where the king was worshipped as the dying and resurrecting Amun. So when the king died, he fused with Amun-Ra, the setting sun, and he travels with Amun-Ra in the underworld and is reborn with him. But the Amuns in the mortuary temples, they are dead and dying. Amun of Karnak, during the beautiful Feast of the Valley, he visits all the Amuns in the mortuary temples and he makes them come alive again. So there's this communication between all these temples and all the different Amuns in the temples. The Amun of Luxor Temple visits the Amun of Medinat Habu from the time of Thutmose III. He visits Amun here every 10 days. It's a 10-day feast. And Thutmose III made a bark sanctuary here for the first time, because this seems to be the first time that Amun of Luxor travels to get his batteries charged with Amun of Medinat Habu. Well, as time went by, from the 21st dynasty, this temple was associated not just with Amun as the cosmic egg, but 8 primeval gods. Amun and Amunet, Heka, Heket, and the other 2, I can't remember. But anyway, 8 of them. So it's like 8 primeval gods waiting to be born under Medina Habu. So if they're 8, they need bigger entryways. So they made a new set of pylons here in the 25th dynasty. And when I took this photograph, I was standing on the Ptolemaic pylons looking down from this photograph. So by the Ptolemaic period, the temple is so important that it required a gigantic set of pylons. And so what we're doing is we are now documenting section by section all of the different parts of this complex, starting with the back sanctuary of Hatshepsut, which we published a couple of years ago. And that is now available for free download from the Oriental Institute Publications website. Now I want you to write this down, because we have been publishing huge books and studies of ancient Egypt, particularly ancient Luxor, since 1924. And many of you have used our books, some of you in the Chicago House Library, some of you elsewhere. They're really big, and many of them are very old now and very hard to find. We started a program a couple of years ago where we digitally scanned every single publication, every single book we've ever done. If you go to the Oriental Institute Publications website and click Egypt, Oriental Institute works all over the Middle East, Turkey, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, you name it, we're there. So the publications are listed by countries: Iraq, Iran, Egypt. Click Egypt. There are about 200 titles that will come up, 200 books that we've produced since the last 100 years. You can have every single one of them free as a PDF download. You just click the little pink arrow and it will download immediately. And they're absolutely beautiful. So even our out-of-print rare books like Paraweb, like all the Medina Habu volumes, and even our newest volumes, you can have them for free. All the plates, all the translations, absolutely everything. So this is a way that the new digital technology is allowing us to share the scientific data that we record with everyone, anyone who can access the internet and have it for free. And this makes me very, very, very happy. And this is our policy from now on. We will always do hard copy books. We will not only do electronic publication, because in a place like Egypt, there's a lot of dust. And as you know, your hard drives can die with one speck of dust. So we will always do hard copy books as well as electronic versions of our books side by side. So every time we put out a new book, you will be able to download it immediately for free, like this one. So Oriental Institute Publications, click Egypt, and all the titles will come up. The latest titles are at the top, and the earliest titles are at the bottom of the list. So now that we have produced Medina Habu 9, which is the back sanctuaries, which show beautiful colored scenes, and I should point out, let's see if I go back, the walls, we have something like 30 color plates, because there was a lot of color left on the Hatshepsut period reliefs that we documented. And we cleaned all of these walls as well. Lutfi Khalid Hassan and his team for 10 years systematically cleaned every single wall surface, and they were all black. They all looked like, let's see, so we don't have a patch wall. Just imagine this wall completely black with soot. Because Medina Habu was the center of a medieval community, a Christian community. They turned the mortuary temple into a church, and they lived in the stone structures, including this one all around, and the cooking fires stained all the walls black, like we see in many, many places. Well, Lithia's team did a beautiful job cleaning all the walls, and as soon as they cleaned the wall, we photographed it in color in black and white. And so all of their hard work, you can have for your very own in the download. So now we're working on Medinet Habu 10, which is the second volume of the 18th Dynasty Temple, the square pillared ambulatory around the Bark Sanctuary. Medinet Habu 11 is the additional additions to the 18th Dynasty Temple. Volume 12 will be the facades and the Bark Sanctuary itself. So there are many, many volumes that we're working on all at the same time. And over the next, I would say after next year, we should have the next volume ready, and then 2 years after that, we'll have the next one. So we'll be pumping them out. I'll keep you posted. We find ourselves working in many hard-to-reach places that tourists can't go to. For instance, if you look very carefully, there's an artist inside this doorway here. This is a hollow space above a doorway added in the 29th Dynasty. When a chorus added this door, he covered up 2 inscribed pillars of Thutmose III. But we found, by cleaning this out, we could actually see some of the decorated surface. So with plastic, we made a tracing of the surface and a beautiful drawing of what is accessible there. So luckily for us, we had a very small artist, Sue Osgood, who could fit into this small space so she could do this drawing. So this will make our scientific record of this monument even more complete. Now, in addition to the very careful facsimile drawings that we do of all the inscribed wall surfaces, all the religious texts, all the historical texts, all the hieroglyphic inscriptions, all the decoration, we also have a team headed by Tina, who looks very small up here, recording graffiti on the tops of the roofs and on the sides of the temples themselves. The kings and the nobility decorated the walls and the pillars and the areas down below. These were the official monuments of the king and his court, but there were many people who served the temple, guards and guardians and minor priests, and they have no monuments. They were too poor to have stelae. They were too poor to have big tombs. They certainly didn't have any statues because you had to be really rich to afford a statue. So what they did was they carved their names on the tops of the temples, on the roof blocks, or on the outside walls where no one actually really saw. And there on the roof blocks, each roof block contains sometimes hundreds of inscriptions from people who have no other monuments. So we have added this to our program. And for instance, at Khonsu Temple, we have a whole book that is devoted only to graffiti on the roof of Khonsu Temple. In this material, you'll see lots and lots of carved feet, because that was like a statue for these people. If they stood there and they carved an outline of their feet, that meant they were standing there for eternity. Magically, that's like a poor man's statue. And sometimes if they could write, and not everyone could, sometimes they would write their name inside the feet, and sometimes the names of their fathers and their father's fathers. In many cases, they couldn't write. They only carved the outlines of their feet. But that still meant that they were part of this temple forever. It's really, really beautiful. So I love recording this material as well. And there'll be a whole book devoted just to the graffiti on the top of Medinet Habu Temple, because the roof is 2/3 preserved there. We're very lucky with Medinet Habu that we have so much preserved, because everywhere else the roof is gone, the roof blocks are gone. But here we have an almost intact one. And many, many people will attain immortality in our book as well, in our book where we publish, and these are done digitally, these drawings are all done using computer drawing. which we do a lot as well now. Now, the other activity that many of you have noticed, you might remember at Medina Habu there was an old block yard here, but it's in a very wet area of Medina Habu. Welcome. This was very wet, and the wall was very low, and there are many more tourists visiting the sites now than in years past. So when Ali Asfar was director of the Gurna Taftish, he asked us if we would help the SCA create a new, more secure storage area on drier ground. He selected the area, and we finished the construction of it a couple of years ago. This is an area where all the pieces from the upper walls, the pieces of monuments from Medina Habu, pieces of the mortuary temple, pieces of the small Amun temple, pieces of the gates, pieces of the Nebo wells, pieces of the God's Wives chapels, they all are now here in protected storage. And we even have many architectural elements from the Christian city that was the final phase of the Medina Habu precinct. Column capitals, doorways. These are all pharaonic blocks that the medieval population took down from the back sanctuary of the mortuary temple, and they broke them into pieces, and they made architectural elements for their city out of them. So we have a special area around the inside of the wall for all these elements. Some of them are really very beautiful. So we've recorded actually more than 3,000 fragments now on our special database that Julia has put together here. And over here is with the Hassan, who coordinates our conservation team. And he's trained a number of very talented Egyptian conservators, and we're preparing next season to train even more in stone conservation and site management and sort of museum displays of some of these objects. This season, we added more roofing around the complex to, again, it gives a little more shade. It's also, when you're doing conservation, it's much better to be doing it in the shade than in full sunlight, because the chemicals work better when there's some shadow, some shade. Here's another photograph of Lutfi here. Many of the pieces, once we get them into the block yard, when we sort them by categories. So we put Ramses III over here, Ramses II over here, next Nebo over there. And of course, it becomes obvious when things join. So the ultimate aim of the block yard storage area, we want to put together as much as we possibly can and either restore it to the temple. We have some blocks that go back to the mortuary temple. We have some blocks that go back to the small Amun temple. We have some well emplacements, a little doorway of next Nebo that went alongside one of his wells at Medina Habu. We want to put that back where it came from, so that eventually there'll be far fewer pieces here. We want to put as much together as possible. So Lutfi has a lot on his hands for the next few years. And we're also creating an open-air museum along the front of the new block yard, where we're piecing together some of the most beautiful elements, architectural elements that we have found in the area. Some you will remember were behind the God's Wives chapels for a while, but they were on bad foundations, so we moved them. Lutfi and his team have consolidated them, repaired the broken stone, and pieced together many of these pieces. So this is something that we hope maybe we'll be finishing next year or the year after. We have many other things to do at the same time that Lutfi and his team will be involved in. So I've told him to take his time with this, because Lutfi is a real artist as well. Many of you may know that he did some beautiful displays in the garden of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. On the right side of the museum, you can see east side. He put together that whole sculpture garden. He really loved doing this. Now, one thing you may notice is no longer standing in Medina Habu is this gate, sandstone gate, from the time of the Roman Emperor Domitian, 1st century AD. This gate was found in many pieces by Georges Daracy in the 19th century when he did clearance work at Medina Habu. He found them reused in many Coptic houses that he was taking down to clear the entryway for the Medina Habu temple. And he found they all went together again. They're Roman period, but Egyptian in style. And he didn't know where they came from, so he put them together just outside, just behind the small Amun temple. Well, we noted that high groundwater salts were decaying the foundations of this gate. And the decay was really, really bad. So Lutfi and our stone people, and we have a structural engineer, Connor Power, they all told me, you have to take this gate down, and you have to make new foundations. And I said, I don't want to take the gate down. Can't we just put in some patch stones here? And they said, no, we have to take it down to do it properly. So I said, Hader, and we made the decision. We talked to the Ministry of Antiquities, and they said, yes, please do this because we can't do this really ourselves. So first, before you do any kind of conservation or restoration, you have to do thorough documentation of the monument. So we photographed it and drew it. This is Frank Helmholtz, our stonemason. He did very careful architectural drawings, beautiful computer drawings of it. And then we started the dismantling last year. This is it with the scaffolding, and this is with the, it was partly taken down. We finished the dismantling this season, so now it's completely dismantled, and you can see all the blocks that are arranged here in this small holding area. We found that Georges Daracy built it. There were two revelations. One is he built it on rubble, just little tiny broken pieces of stone, and almost every single one was a reused block. They all had hieroglyphs on it. Some of them were Ramses III, some of them were Ramses II, some of them were Kushite. So we collected all this material, we put it in the block jar. The other thing we found out was that the bottom courses here, he didn't find all the pieces, he didn't find all the blocks. So he brought in blocks that from the outside look like they're blank. But when we took them apart, we found out one of them had an inscription of Ramses III on it. One of them was a big Christian block with a big cross on it. And they had all the decoration had been turned in so you couldn't see. So we took all this apart and we put the new blocks in the block jars. And our stonemason is now cutting new stone to replace those blocks. The other thing we found out was that the bottom blocks were like cheese. They were like, you could put your hand to them. If we had not taken this down, it would have fallen, probably next year. It was so bad. It was much worse than I thought. If we had tried just putting in a couple of patches, it would have stood for maybe a few more years, but it still would have fallen. So my conservation team, they were very good. They gave me good advice. Take it all the way down and do it right. So now you will see where this was standing, there is a cement slab. We removed Daracy's 19th century foundation. We put in a concrete slab, reinforced concrete. It will cure over the summer. It will dry thoroughly. And then beginning next season, we will rebuild the gate with new blocks, new foundation blocks, and put the old blocks back up. Once there's some conservation, some cleaning that needs to be done on these blocks by Lutfi and the conservation team. Now the other project that we're working on the West Bank is the Theban tomb of Nefersekheru. Turn my phone off. I want that to go up. Now Nefersekheru was the steward of Amenhotep III's palace of Malkata, south of Medina Habu. And I should have brought a satellite photograph. complex of Amenhotep III, south of Medinet Habu, is like Amarna. It's all mud brick. It's built, one big difference is it's built along a harbor that was 2 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide, the Luxor Habu. In antiquity, that was filled with water, and the palace was built alongside it. And the palace was partly excavated 100 years ago by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Actually, first Dr.Ray was there. When you look on the walls of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, you will see many beautiful paintings of floor decoration, painted pavings, painted plaster, flowers, ducks flying out of the marshes. You would assume all of those are from Amarna, but they're not. They're almost all from Al-Qaeda. When Dr.Ray excavated there, he found all of the floors intact with beautiful marsh scenes and bull scenes, the little calves in the thickets. He pulled everything up. And it's all in the Egyptian Museum and all on the walls there. Well, since 100 years have gone by, the palace was left open and it's in terrible condition. So we talked to the Ministry of Antiquities about this and said, you have to do something to protect the site. It's falling to pieces. And there's agricultural expansion. The local farmers are expanding their fields into the palace complex. The palace is 5 kilometers long. 5 kilometers from Medinet Habu all the way to Kamal Abed. Almost all the way to the Al Madeira Hotel on the West Bank. It's an enormous site, and it's made of several different parts. And it's very fragile because it's all mud brick. Well, the ministry agreed to make a protective wall around the site, and many of you have seen this. The Metropolitan Museum of Art and Emory University have come back in the last 4 years. They've resumed excavations, and they're going to do a restoration project to restore the mud brick walls to make it so that visitors can visit. They're going to put signage up, they're going to make pathways, so you can bring interested groups to visit the palace. Just like Amarna, parts of Amarna, you can now visit Barry Kemp's work, has been beautiful, capping the walls, restoring some of the architectural elements. This is what our friends and the Ministry of Antiquities want to do for Al-Qaeda Palace. So we're very excited by this, and the ministry, before the revolution, built a wall around the site that's 11 kilometers long. And they made an agreement with the local farmers that they would not extend their fields past the walls. They bought much of the property along the wall and made it bigger. God bless the Ministry of Antiquities for what they did, because in the future, this will be another major tourist attraction for Luxor. It's Luxor's own Amarna, and it's from the time of Amenhotep III, and it's quite possible that part of it was the residence of Akhenaten as well, so maybe the Middle Palace. Anyway, it's a fantastic thing that's happening, and I tell you all this because the man who owned this tomb was the manager of the palace for Amenhotep III. He was the steward of Al-Qaeda Palace. His name was Nefersekru, and this tomb has never been cleared. You see inside, the debris goes almost to the ceiling, and the University of Chicago House, has had permission to work there for many years. We just haven't had the time. Now that the palace itself is being worked on again, we decided it's a good time to work on the tomb of the steward of the palace so that we can work at the same time, work together. So, of course, when we started our work, the first thing that you do is documentation. So first, there's only a little decoration And that's in the courtyard. You know, it's like Caraway. Originally, there would have been a big courtyard and then the tomb inside. But they never finished the courtyard, they only finished one side. And in this portico, there are reliefs, sunk reliefs that are very, very beautiful, very delicate, as beautiful as Ramosa, but in sunk relief, not raised relief. So we started by photographing everything, Yarko, with our large format film, photography, and digital. We photographed every square centimeter. And we consulted with Kent Weeks, because Kent Weeks, you know, the limestone in this tomb is terrible. The condition of the limestone is awful. And our structural engineer, Connor, said that we should really put in some supports. So with consulting with Kent Weeks, we put in the same sort of steel pillars here that he used in KV5, the tomb of Ramses protected his sons, because he had the same stone there. So he gave us some guidance. We made the stabilization, and our art team, including Sue here, started drawing these really, really beautiful reliefs. Now this tomb, you can't bring tourists there yet. But we hope when we're finished with our project in a number of years, we'll make some restoration, and maybe it will be possible to visit this tomb along with several others in the area. But this is going to take many years of work. First we do the documentation, then we do the conservation. So right now we're doing the documentation, and you can see we do a special type of drawing on photographs. That allows for very, very beautiful accuracy and precision, and we never have to touch the wall, because this wall is in very bad condition. We can't put tracing paper on it. If we press on the tracing paper, we damage the wall. So we take photographs and draw on photographs, and then leach the photograph away, and then we've got a beautiful black and white drawing. So that's how we do most of our drawings, especially when the wall surface is weak. Sometimes there are other occasions when we'll do tracing and other techniques for recording, but this is very good for damaged walls. And you can see Sue here doing that So, moving right along, we also have a project at Khonsu Temple now. Now, Khonsu Temple, I know many of you will take your groups there, but most people don't. But this is a beautiful, beautiful temple. And it's very interesting to us because, you know, it's another monument of Ramses III. He built it. He built it at the very end of his reign because he never finished all the decorations inside. He started the back sanctuary, he got to the bark sanctuary, and then he stopped. Obviously, he died. Ramses IV continued the carving, and then it was finished in the Third Intermediate Period, finished in the 21st Dynasty. Ramses III wanted to build Khonsu Temple very quickly. We don't know why. So instead of quarrying stone from Jebel Silsila, where he got all of the stone for his other monuments, he took down at least 5 temples from the West Bank, and maybe from the East Bank. He took down the part of the mortuary temple of Amenhotep III. He took down the mortuary temple of Id-Horemheb. He took down the mortuary temple of Amenhotep, son of Hapu. And he took the stones and he built Khonsu Temple with them. There is not one stone here that was quarried fresh. Every single stone in this temple comes from an earlier temple. And he wanted to build it so quickly, he didn't erase any of the original decoration. He just turned the stones around. Or if the decoration was facing out, he put plaster, thick plaster over it, and carved through the plaster. So, every time anyone does restoration work there that exposes foundations or walls, earlier decoration shows. And the American Research Center, as part of a dewatering program for Karnak and Luxor, has been doing restoration and conservation training at the site of Khonsu Temple for the last 4 years. And you know, all of you know, that the groundwater problem was so bad at Karnak and Luxor that the Egyptian government and the American government and the Swedish government combined forces and developed a dewatering program. We helped with this. 20 years ago, we said, you have to do something. Many of you, of course, I've been working here 30 years, before some of you were born. I remember when Khonsu Temple was wet inside. You'd go in one of the chambers and it smelled like a swamp. It was so wet, it was awful. We told our friends in the ministry, in the United States Embassy, in USAID, if you don't do something, you will lose the temple. It will collapse. I mean, the foundations can't support it. There's so much salt coming in. So this collaboration designed a series of drains around Karnak and around Luxor, that when the water from the fields drains toward the Nile, these pipes, these drains, catch the water and take it away before it goes underneath the temple. The system for Karnak and Luxor was finished after 3 years of construction. You'll remember it was terrible. It was finished in 2006, and 1 year later, the groundwater had dropped more than 3 meters. So the water table went down 3 meters, and everything slowed down. All the decay slowed down. And now it's possible to do proper conservation and restoration work there. It was not possible before. When the walls were wet, you cannot treat them. Now the walls are dry and proper treatment can happen. So you've seen the work of the American Research Center in the first court at Luxor Temple. You know, the eastern or western row columns. That's part of this program. As another part of the program was to replace the rotten or missing paving stones from Khonsu Temple all the way to the back. Now, Khonsu is perfectly preserved. You know why? Like Luxor Habu, it was turned into a church. And so apparently the community lived here, the church was here, some people lived in the back. And so that's why it comes down to us. Thank goodness they didn't take it down. They simply converted it into a church and the center of a small Christian community in southern Karnak. Everyone knew at that time that underneath Egyptian temples there were crypts full of you-know-what treasure. Gold and silver cups and saucers and statues that were kept there, they were stored there when they weren't needed for the festivals or for the rituals. Now, we know this to be true in the late period temples, but not for temples before the time of the Ptolemies. This is from the time of Ramses III. There were no crypts underneath Khonsu Temple, but the local community tore up all of the paving stones looking for chambers filled with treasure. They didn't find anything, but they didn't put any floor blocks back. So there are all these holes all through the court. In every single chamber, there are floor blocks missing. So the American Research Center and the Karnak MSA worked together to make a restoration of all the missing floor blocks. And what they would first do is they would clean out the areas where the blocks were missing. And of course, there were earlier blocks showing. So Chicago House has been working with the American Research Center for the last 4 years, doing documentation of all the reused material, all the earlier decoration that has been exposed in the restoration process. And so my team, and of course we have had to work very quickly because the American Research Center workmen will clean out the floor area We go in and do the documentation. They can't put the new floor blocks in until we're finished. So we had to go quickly, but still do a very careful job. So we use tracing in some cases. Here we could take some photographs because this was sticking out enough. And of course the reason for doing this is when the new floor blocks go in, this material you cannot ever see again because the floor blocks are so heavy, they're sealed. So this we call salvage epigraphy. It's emergency documentation. And we have been able to record quite a bit of material this way. So this is the Associate Director, the Luxor Director for the American Research Center in Egypt, John Sherman. And this is our Senior Epigrapher, Brett McLean. They're talking about strategy, planning, because we had to coordinate with them. They needed to tell us where they were going to work and when they were ready for us. And then we would go in, do our drawing very quickly so they could continue the restoration work. And then while they were doing that, or while we were recording, they would open up another area, clean it up, and then we would go to that when we were finished with this area. So this is what they would do. They would clean the floor areas, expose all the blocks, and then we would go in and do the recording. Now in some cases, like here, you see how big some of the new paving stones are. When those babies are in place, that's it. No one's going to see this material ever again. In some cases, we couldn't take good photographs, and it was very hard to do tracings because we couldn't see the decoration. So, especially when you have blocks that are turned in, you can see that in the crack there's decorated surface, but you can't even see what it is. We developed a technique where the American Research Center workmen would clean out the dirt, the sand between the blocks, and we would slip a piece of aluminum foil in, and with cotton on the tips of long sticks, we could make a rubbing without even seeing it. We could pull it up and have an impression of the decorated surface that was hidden. And so then we would make a tracing of this, and we would do our regular drawings from the tracings. And as a result, we've been able to extract enormous amounts of material about the blocks that are reused in the flooring and the foundations of Khonsu Temple. And this will give you an idea of the quality of some of the decorated blocks that are in these cracks. This crack right here, this is this figure setting the first. It's from a huge lintel. And all the areas between the stones like this, they all got cleaned out. And if there was a decorated surface, then we would do our recording. This is really exciting. So what we would do is we would make a tracing and then digitally scan it, reduce it to 1 to 4, and then do a very careful ink drawing of it on top of it to communicate the 3 dimensions of the relief. In this case, it's raised relief. So you see we have the original block here, our tracing of it, and then the final ink drawing. And here are more drawings. Now you'll notice that most of the figures in these blocks on the floor have hawk heads. And almost all of the texts that we found refers to Khonsu. So what we realized we had was we have a completely dismantled Khonsu temple earlier than the time of Ramses III, and of course it makes perfect sense. We know there was a Khonsu temple before Ramses III. What he did was he took that down first, and he used the blocks from the 18th dynasty temple as his foundations and his flooring. And then, above that, he used another temple. And then above that, he reused another one. So we have stratigraphic levels, layers of reused temples. At the bottom is the original Khonsu temple. Just above that seems to be the mortuary temple of Amen-Horemheb and Amenhotep son of Hapu. And above that, at the top, at the roof line, is the mortuary temple of Amenhotep III. There's enough decoration showing we could document it all and have an idea about the decorative program of these earlier temples. It's fantastic. So there are many, many, many surprises. For instance, we were documenting this block that's now inscribed for Ramses II. And we looked very closely at it. It's all sunk relief. We looked very carefully at it, and it didn't make a lot of sense. This is all sunk relief, but the vulture here is raised relief, but the king underneath it is sunk relief. But then in the cartouche, there are traces in raised relief of Horemheb's name, and under that, there's the name of I. So these wall surfaces of this earlier Khonsu temple got modified a couple of times, and Ramses II ends up erasing all the raised relief decoration and punching in sunk relief decoration of his own. So we think we understand why Ramses III took it down. It must have been very messy by the time of Ramses III, with all the recarving that Ramses II did, in addition to the damage that Akhenaten did to the original figures, because all the god figures have been hacked by Akhenaten and then restored starting in Tutankhamun's reign. So this is why Ramses III probably wanted to create a new temple, a nice clean temple. Well, in the foundations, we also found blocks in limestone that are a completely different style. It's not 18th dynasty, it's Middle Kingdom. And what's interesting is, one of the blocks refers to Khonsu by name. The text actually has Khonsu's name on it. And here, it looks like this figure is probably hawk-headed. So we have the remains of a Khonsu temple from possibly Dynasty 11 in the foundations of the 18th Dynasty temple, in the foundations of Ramses III's temple. So with this work and our analysis, we are writing new history for this part of Karnak. We now know what Ramses III replaced, and we now know what Thutmose III replaced, because he seems to have taken down an earlier temple from the time of the Middle Kingdom and built a new one, probably with Hatshepsut. Thutmose III is the earliest 18th dynasty king we have so far. So it's really interesting. When the American Research Center opens up an area, we never know what we're going to find, because it's all of great value historically. Now, eventually, what we'll do when we're finished, we're going to continue this work next season at least, and continue documenting blocks all the way up to the roof. When we're finished, we will put all of this information in a series of signs, educational signage that we'll have in the temple, so that this is something that you can also share with your groups. The other thing is, I want to urge you to come and visit Khonsu Temple now. The back sanctuary is still off limits, although in the summer I suspect there's no problem getting back there. But the American Research Center has completely repaved the front area, so it is now very easy to go in. And it's a wonderful space. It's a beautiful little temple if you have time to show it to your family. So right now, last year we documented more than 600 blocks. Now we're up to 700. So it's fantastic information. And we're just beginning the analysis now. There's some blocks we've recorded. It's a very small sample, but some actually join. So we're getting an idea of the heights of walls of the original temple. Interestingly, it looks like Thutmose III's temple, Khonsu temple, looked just like the small Amun temple of Medinet Habu. We're very lucky. That's the only Thutmose temple with the square pillars that's intact. So we have a wonderful model at Medinet Habu of what the original Khonsu temple probably looked like. Now, the last and very important area where we have been working since the mid-1970s, of course, is Luxor Temple. And And we began our program there with the documentation of all the reliefs and inscriptions of Tutankhamun and Amenhotep III in the Great Colonnade Hall. So we have two huge volumes. One volume is devoted only to the Opet Festival scenes, which are very hard to see when you're there. But with our drawings and photographs, they're beautiful. They're very clear. So you can now download that and read the narrative of the procession, the river procession from Karnak to Luxor during the Opet Festival, and then back again after the Opet rituals were accomplished. And these reliefs from the time of Tutankhamun and Amenhotep III are very vibrant. They're really quite lively and wonderful. And as I said, it's hard to see when you're there at the temple, but everything, one of the reasons we do our drawings and do our photographs for these publications is to make this information accessible to everyone who wants to access it. So anyway, that's why we started at Luxor Temple. Now, you'll notice that, of course, the side walls of the Colonnade Hall were taken down. You have to imagine that this entire hall had walls as high as the columns, and the whole thing was roofed in stone. The stone roof collapsed in the Roman period. The side walls were taken down, broken into pieces, and used for house foundations all around the temple. We have one little bit that survives here, and I'll see it. I'll show you a picture of it from the inside a little bit later. So when we were doing our documentation of the reliefs on the walls, we also looked around the block yards and found hundreds and hundreds of blocks from the Colonnade Hall wall. So that's one of the things that I became interested in 30 years ago when I began work as a student with Chicago House. I love piecing things together. So when I started work there, in our block yard here, we had 100 blocks. Now, we have 50,000. Because I couldn't stop. And what we've done, originally all these blocks were on the bare ground. We've lifted them up. We have built beautiful mastabas that protect it from the water. We put everything up on these platforms, these mastabas. And again, I put Tutankhamun over here, Amenhotep III over here, Ramses II over here, next to the parts of the temple that they came from. Because all of these pieces go back together. They're like big jigsaw puzzles. So we've been involved with the block yard, as I said, for the last 30 years. Now, currently, we are working on blocks that come from the church that we call the Church of St. Thecla, based on inscriptions that were excavated in it. This church is located right outside the security area. So when you come out, when you come through the entryway, through security at Luxor Temple, you are literally right here. You're looking at the back wall of the church right here. So here's security, here's the back wall. You have to imagine that this is just the sanctuary. It's just the eastern end of the church. The church itself extended all the way to the obelisk. Now, these foundations were excavated in 1960 by the Egyptian government, and they took them all down because they didn't want them to be in the way of the pylon. They wanted you to have a beautiful view of the pylon. The sanctuary was only excavated in 1982, and that's all that's still standing. Well, we have many, many, many blocks from the sanctuary, and architect Jay Heidel here has been making drawings of every single one of them. We moved them to a special part of the block yard next to the Colonnade Hall. We have about 180 blocks from this church, and most of them are from the sanctuary. Columns, capitals, arches, and what makes them very interesting is, you can see They're all carved with beautiful patterns that you normally, in Christian churches from this period, and this is probably around 5th century AD, normally this is only done in paint. But here, it's carved. And we have so many blocks. I've been very interested in this material for many years. So we got a special grant from the Suarez family in Egypt. Who, interestingly enough, one of the brothers went to the University of Chicago, which is very nice for us. So Nassif Suarez gave us a grant to start the work on this church, and we've been documenting it for a couple of years. The decorated blocks are very beautiful. We're slowly piecing them together, and this year we were able to reassemble almost one entire arch. You can see it's quite large and beautifully decorated. It's still being decorated in the Roman style, because this is still Roman Egypt. You know, Christianity was accepted very early in Egypt, but of course it was still when Egypt was ruled by Rome. So the decoration in the earliest churches is still very similar to the decoration we found in Roman temples. And this pattern, for instance, is the Roman acanthus pattern. It's an acanthus leaf, which you see on Corinthian columns. So they've reinterpreted in this wonderful, beautifully decorated arch. So we're doing a study now. We're still documenting the pieces, and you'll see them in our open-air museum, which I'll talk about in a moment. You'll see them on one platform. You'll see this arch restored. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at a major section of one of the earliest churches in Luxor. And we're hoping we have enough pieces to put some of them back in place, to restore part of this church sanctuary. So I'll keep you posted on that. The next couple of years will be quite interesting. Now, you all know that at Luxor Temple, there's almost no signage whatsoever. There are no educational panels. And this is something that we've been working on the last couple of years. And so Chicago House is designing a series of panels that will be in English and Arabic with ground plans and explanations of every part of Luxor Temple. And this is the sign that we have designed for the front of the temple. In fact, we'll put it right here at the top of the stairway, leading down, so that when people are waiting for groups, they can do a little orientation here. We will also put a duplicate, working very well, a duplicate right here at the far end of the, on the right side of the pylons, where there's a lovely open area. We're doing this so that you can orient your groups to what they're going to see throughout the temple. And we have labeled all the different parts in English and Arabic. And also, we've indicated where the bathrooms are, where the cafe is on the sign, to help help the visitor orient themselves in the temple. And we have the signs that we're designed for the first court. Probably 3 signs for the Colonnade Hall. We'll have a sign for the Amenhotep III court, for the Imperial Cult Chamber here, and the back sanctuary, and then we'll have a series of signs in the open-air museum. And right now I had hoped that because I'm going to be taking many of you through Luxor Temple tomorrow morning, I wanted to have this one up for you. I was just in Cairo, and there was a little mistake on it, so they're redoing it. But I'm told that by this Sunday, the panels will be here, and I swear to you, before we leave on April 15th, I will put these 2 up at the entryway and inside, just outside the pylons for you. And then over the summer, we'll finish the designing and hopefully start the printing of all the other signs for inside Luxor Temple. And then the next year we'll do more signs from the lunar color. Because this is very, very important. You know, this is educational. And right now there's nothing. So many groups are very lucky. They have you to tell them what they're looking at. But there are many people who go through the temple who do not have your guidance. So this we hope will also help them. That's right, this is also for you, to help you. Now, many of you have already seen our open-air museum. I've been working, as I said, for 30 years on this material, and I put many things together. And I was talking with our friends at Chicago House and with the inspectors, and we decided maybe it's time to share this with everyone, because we have many pieces from Luxor Temple, and we're putting some of these back on the wall, because that's a very important thing to do. If you can identify where groups of pieces go, you should put it back, because that helps protect the pieces, but it also gives it context, and it makes it very meaningful. A piece by itself is very interesting, but when you put it back on the wall, it really tells you a lot. But there are many pieces that we have in the block yard, some from Luxor Temple, that went way up there. We can never put them back because there's too much stone in them. We also discovered when we did our analysis of the fragmentary material of Luxor Temple that more than 50% of it does not come from Luxor. It comes from Karnak. And you know, one of the reasons that Luxor Temple is so well preserved, you know, it's still standing. The pylons, the first court, the colonnade hall, the back sanctuary, the back. It's because in the Middle Ages, the townspeople, the inhabitants of Luxor, they continued to use the temple. They use it as a place of worship in the first court. You have the Ramses II court, you have the church in the court, you have the mosque on top. Continuous worship. And the entryway for each of these sacred places is through the pylons. Through the pylons to Ramses Court, through the pylons to the Christian church, originally through the pylons to the mosque. And of course, when the court was excavated in 1960, they moved the entryway to the mosque to the city side, to the east side. But it's wonderful. It continues to be a place of worship, which makes it a very special place in Egypt. The colonnade hall was used as a storage area for, we think, animals, because there are holes cut in the walls for ropes to tie their animals up. And you know what the Amenhotep III court was used for up until 100 years ago? A granary. This is where Luxor town stored its grain, because it's up high and it's always dry. So they continued to use the temple, and the columns marked where the area was they were using, so they chose not to quarry them away. They left them standing. Instead, they started quarrying Karnak, which had a much smaller community living there. And so more than half of what we have in our block yard comes from the southern parts of Karnak. And this is very interesting. As we analyze these pieces, in the future, we will take them back to Karnak, because they're lovely in the Luxor block yard and in our museum. But our museum is temporary and it will evolve. It will change over time. So, our conservator, Hiroko Korea, who many of you have seen working in the block yard, she coordinated the reassembly of many groups. I put them together on paper, and sometimes, you know, just gravity. But we did these semi-permanent displays of joined blocks. This can be, it can be permanent or it can be taken down very quickly, just like all of our platforms. The brick platforms, the brick masatum on which we store all the blocks, they're filled with sand. They can be taken down for in the future when they're not needed anytime. So they function either as something that can be permanent or can be temporary, just like these displays. So she coordinated the reassembly with our that's dedicated to material that was found in the trenching around Luxor Temple to put the drains in to lower the groundwater. They found many foundations from medieval, Middle Ages foundations of houses. When those were recovered, we put some of the best examples in this display. And you know that we created this walkway for you so that the groups can walk along the pathways. And starting at this point, we have the chronological display begins. All this material is Amenhotep III blocks from this part of the temple. And you notice that we put in the security fence here. It's just far enough away so tourists cannot touch the blocks. The fence stops them from touching. And you all notice the lights that are there. You'll notice that the lights stay on until 9 o'clock when the temple lights go off. So they're keyed into the temple lighting system. So, as I said, the chronological display starts here from the Middle Kingdom, and it goes all the way to the present day. So we start with the time of Sesostris I. These are two blocks that we found in the block yard, one of which has Sesostris' part of his cartouche, and you'll notice that the style looks just like the White Chapel. There's a slim possibility that the one on the right might actually come from the White Chapel, but we don't know. We're still doing research on this. So the display begins with the Middle Kingdom, and then it continues with 18th Dynasty. We don't seem to have anything else in between, starting with Hatshepsut here, and then Thutmose III. We have a couple of groups of Thutmose III, including his cartouche. Thutmose IV, and then Amenhotep III. This is wonderful for the visitor. They can see how in the 18th dynasty you have a beautiful raised relief, very elegant style, and over time it changes. This is the whole point of this. In the time of Akhenaten, it really changes. So we have a number of blocks that show Talatat. We have many Talatat in our block yard, but that's not because Akhenaten had a structure at Luxor Temple. He did not. All of these Talatat have inscriptions that tell us they came from Akhenaten's Aten Temple at Karnak. This material, and we have thousands of Talatat at Luxor Temple, they were brought when Karnak was being quarried in the Middle Ages by the inhabitants of Luxor. They come with the stone from Karnak to Luxor Temple for reuse in the Christian and Islamic periods. So none of this material originates at Luxor. It all came from Karnak, and someday it will all go back to Karnak when there is a processing area for the thousands and thousands of Akhenaten blocks that are in storage magazines all around Karnak Temple. We also have, we have some Tutankhamun material, which I left out. We have Seti I material from the Colonnade Hall. You know, the very southern end of the Colonnade Hall was finished in relief by Seti. Amenhotep III started the Colonnade Hall. Tutankhamun finished the construction and did most of the decoration, but then he died before it could be finished. At the southern end of the hall, for the coronation of King Ai, was finished in paint. And it was only until the time of Seti I that he finished the actual carving. But he tried to match the style of the Tutankhamun reliefs. So his reliefs are very flat, except for the figures of Seti himself, which look like the figures of Seti Arvadis and Seti Osiris temple. So it's very, very interesting. They're trying to match the style of the Tutankhamun reliefs. Well, the style really changes with the time of Ramses II, because he likes a nice deep sunk relief. These are blocks that come from the outside of the first court at Luxor Temple. And these are two small sections of a very large group that eventually we will put back on the walls, but not now. We'll have to wait on that. So for now, they're here on display. We also have 21st Dynasty material, 25th Dynasty material, lots of gates. Now this is where it starts getting really interesting, because none of this material comes from Luxor Temple. It all comes from Karnak. And there's a special emphasis on goddesses. Here you have the lion-headed goddess. It's either Sekhmet or Weret Hakau. This is associated with Mut Temple. And we believe now that we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of blocks quarried from the Temple of Mut, south of Karnak, and brought to Luxor Temple for reuse in the Middle Ages. We have many sections of gates and a lot of Ptolemaic material. Here is another a whole wall from the time of Nectanebo II. We have several other wall sections. These are all blocks found in a foundation next to the East Roman Gate a few years ago when the Supreme Council Ministry of Antiquities was doing restoration work there. We helped them with this. We helped recover this material, reuse it as a foundation, and we reassembled it, and we have this wonderful chapel. Nectanebo II, the inscriptions, even though Amun and Mut and Khonsu are being worshipped here, the inscriptions suggest it is also a chapel to the goddess Mut. So it probably comes from somewhere near Mut Temple. When you see this group, remember that. You can tell your groups that from this point, most of this material comes from the southern side of Karnak. I should mention at this point, we kept the labels very simple for the open-air museum, because we know we don't want people standing there and reading for half an hour, right? Because they block traffic. We kept the labels very simple, names and dates. That's it. We are preparing an online catalog now attached to the Chicago House webpage, where there'll be much more information about each group. And when we're finished with that, we hope to finish most of it this summer. We will put the web address on little signs throughout the Open Air Museum, so when people are home, they can access the website and learn all kinds of information that there is no time to learn when you're there on site. I just want you to know there's minimum information in the labels, but there'll be maximum information on the internet after this summer. Now we have many, many blocks and columns from the Ptolemaic period. Ptolemy I, Ptolemy II, Ptolemy IV, Ptolemy VI, Ptolemy VIII. All of this material seems to come from the Temple of Mut. So it's very, very interesting. Now Ptolemy I, this material I collected this season. We have something like 130 blocks from the time of Ptolemy I. We have no idea where they come from. They seem to be primarily dedicated to the god Khonsu. So it's somewhere, again, from southern Karnak, but no one knows where. It's a big mystery, so we hope we'll figure this out. But the Ptolemy II, Ptolemy IV, Ptolemy VI, Ptolemy VIII, and Ptolemy XII material all seems to come from the Temple of Mut. The major figures being offered to in these scenes are the goddess Mut. Like right here. So this is extremely interesting. And we have much more material than we have on display that we're in the process of analyzing now. And eventually, in the future, we will move all this material back to Mut Temple. Now, we've done a little preliminary analysis, and you know, those of you who visited Mut, and you know that the Ministry of Antiquities and the American Research Center will be opening Moot Temple to the public, I think within the next year or so. They're preparing it now so that people can visit it. And you know that the basis of the walls are standing very nicely. There's a lovely decoration on it. Our material seems to be from the upper parts of the gates and walls. The material that's still there is the lower parts, but the middle parts are missing. So this is a bummer. It means we can't actually put this back on the walls, not yet. But we know from documents from the late 19th century, from the late 1800s, that the governor of Luxor granted a permit to someone to take down the standing walls of Moot Temple to build a saltpeter factory in Luxor, where they make gunpowder. Now, if any of you, in the development program for Luxor, in the future, if any of you see anything, any buildings coming down or exposed that look like a gunpowder factory, that's where many, many blocks from the Temple of Moot have been reused. So let us know, okay? We've been, this development program for Luxor was terrible. I will tell you honestly. It was very painful for us to watch Luxor being changed so quickly. Beautiful buildings coming down everywhere. We were crying, and I'm very happy that that's stopped for now. They will resume it at some point. My one hope was when they took down a building, maybe they'd find the saltpeter factory, but so far nothing has turned up. But that's where all the missing blocks are. We also have material on display now from the Christian period. Some beautiful church elements, not from the church of Tekla, these are from other churches with some beautiful decoration. And then we even have some wonderful house dedication inscriptions from the more modern period. This is either a century or two old, and Mr. Francis very kindly made us a translation of this. So we have even some modern material as well. And I found some more of the block art that's very interesting too, another slab like this. Those of you who have visited at night, you can actually see the reliefs better at night than you can during the day. If you go between 1 and 3 o'clock, you get raking light, which is very, very nice. But at night, the lights are really beautiful. And it's a wonderful experience to go out and see this. The other reason we did this was to help with the traffic flow in the back. Because in the Roman sanctuary, there's this one little door, and everyone goes in and everyone comes out. And it's terrible in the late morning and the late afternoon, and even sometimes in the evening. So now we've decided so people will go out to the east, around the outside, and back in the ambit of the third court. And that helps reduce the congestion in the back. So we tried to help them. Now, the culmination, the end point of our block yard program is to restore fragmentary material to the wall. Whenever we know where it came from, if we could put it back, we put it back. So you know that in 2006, we made a buttress to help hold this part of the wall. Remember, it was leaning in. We were afraid if Luxor had an earthquake or if the groundwater continued to be a problem, it would just fall. So we built a brick buttress, and it just so happens that this group of fragments joins the wall right at that point. So we used the brick buttress as the matrix for the stone. We inserted the stone pieces into the brick and then covered it with plaster. Then I did restoration painting like I did on the restoration drawing for the publication to make it comprehensible to anyone on the ground looking up.
Some tourists got comment on it.
Do they like it? They don't like it? Malish. We're not taking it down.
I know, because you can't do that.
That's right. Well, in the future, they will find more pieces. And in the future, because we've made it in brick and stone, they can make a hole in the brick and they can put the stone in. So we see this as an evolving thing. It will grow in time. So right now it might look a little mesquite, but it's holding the wall up, which is not mesquite. That's very important. If we did not do this, then it's quite possible we'd have a terrible problem later on. So malesh. This year, or actually this last couple of years, as you know, we also added a group of 111 blocks to the wall of the Amenhotep III court. And this is our stonemason Frank and our workmen. This group, and you can see it's being set into the brick here. It's the same idea. If we find new pieces later, we take the brick out and we insert the stone in. This group rose very, very high above the wall, higher than the outside of the wall. So we also made a restoration of the outside wall so that it's beautiful from all angles, inside and outside. And so this is what it looked like when we finished the brick and the plaster. And again, I painted restoration, beautiful restoration painting, to make it, you know, when we look at these things, we know what's missing. But the general public, you know, the usual tourists, they don't know much about Egyptian art. So we do this for them, but we try to keep the restoration very, very simple. This also helps us find other pieces that might go to the wall if we know what to look for. So this is the restored inside wall, and this, you see, this is all new stone at the top. We raised it up so that it's beautiful from the outside as well. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit, when I was here before I talked about this, but I'm going to bring this up again because there's still many questions about this chamber and this final, or this late phase of Luxor Temple. We know in the time of Diocletian, there were a series of fortifications built all up and down the Nile. There were a series of revolts against the Roman emperors at this time, and so Diocletian came with the Roman army and he quashed the rebellion and he built the fort of Babylon in Old Cairo. He built this fort around Luxor Temple. He built one in Aswan and probably a couple of others. He took down all the old enclosure wall and he replaced it with a new fortification wall that was designed to deter any more rebellion. Now this is late 3rd century AD, okay? This is just before the Roman Empire accepted Christianity as a legitimate religion. In the time of Diocletian, Christianity was not accepted as religion, and the Christians were persecuted. If you were a Christian, and if you would not worship the emperor, who was considered to be a god, you were killed. Now at Luxor Temple, not only was the Roman city within this wall, but they changed the cult chamber of the pharaoh. They changed it into the imperial cult chamber where the Roman emperor was worshipped as a god. This is where the Christians were brought, and if they would not worship the Roman emperor as a god, they were killed, maybe there or outside. It was a terrible place for the Christian population. There are, Chicago House worked with the American Research Center when they cleaned the remains of the frescoes that covered this whole area. The Romans plastered the walls, they blocked the door, they turned this into a statue niche. There was a platform in front of it on which the emperor held court, or the governor. This is where the Christians were brought for questioning. And all of the decoration on either side of the niche, and in the niche and on all the walls, was Roman frescoes showing the Roman emperors and their court officials, and the Roman army, their cavalry, their horses. This was not ever a church. This place was terrible to the Christians. This place was where many Christians died. It looks like a church because early churches looked like Roman temples. And this room is very important for the history and the development of Roman sanctuaries constructed in Egypt before Christianity was accepted as a state religion. It's wonderful. It's really interesting. But the decoration on the walls has nothing to do with Christianity. There are no saints. There is no figure of Jesus in the Last Supper. There's nothing like that. It's the Roman emperors, their court officials, and the Roman army. And I don't have a photograph of it, but off on the east, you know, the last cleaning that was done, there are all these horse legs. That's because the east wall and the west wall had paintings showing the Roman legionaries bringing their horses in for review of the emperor, and the emperors were painted on these walls. This type of decoration is called adventus. It's like a review, a special review that the Roman emperors did.